Okay, thank you, everyone. That was a lengthy item, but I think there was a lot of really good questions and certainly a lot of detail that's been conveyed to us. The next item up is the item 9, the Auckland Transport Quarter 1 performance. I think we'll call up Acting CEO Mark Lambert, please, to address that, and just to give people a little indication as to how we hope to proceed, that we get this item through before lunch and then maybe break for lunch at 1:30, Maya says. I think certainly some of the components have been covered in the last item, so that will hopefully aid that. I would just finally say before I leave the floor open to Mark that the request to Auckland Transport in terms of this presentation also asks for a focus on the public transport crisis as it goes to the buses, as it goes to the ferries, and the potential effects of the rail closure coming up. So without further ado, thank you, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, ko Mark Lambert Takoinga. I'm currently Interim Chief Executive. You've already met this morning. Derek Coper, who's our GM of Public Transport Services, looks after our operations, and Christian Messelin, who looks after our public transport development side of the business as well. As you've said, Chair, this item was around the quarterly update on performance, but as you've requested, we're going to provide or take up most of the time to provide an update on the current public transport situation and what we're doing about that. Okay. So what I'll run through briefly, I'm conscious I'm between you and lunch by the sounds of it, so we'll run through the first quarter update, some of the trends that we're currently seeing around public transport and the current situation, our challenges, and also just a quick look ahead at the next 4 months or so with regards to public transport in Auckland. So first of all, I've just got 2 slides on our Q1 performance. Firstly, public transport patronage. The good news is we have seen an increase over the first quarter of public transport patronage. It's gone from around 59% or 60 million passenger boardings per annum at the start of the quarter, and we're currently sitting at around 67 to 70% of pre-COVID levels, which equates to around 70 million boardings over the 3 months or so. Out of our 28 or so statement of intent performance measures, we're currently tracking at 7 of those are being on track or exceeding. A couple of those being public transport patronage and rail patronage, PT service punctuality and customer satisfaction with regards to public transport roading. And what's pleasing for us is our response time to queries around roading requests for service improvements. We do have 8 of our SOIs which are currently haven't been reported or are tracking below, which is disappointing. In particular, I'd like to flag to the committee the death and serious injuries on our local road network. We have just seen in November probably the worst month for a number of years, which is extremely disappointing. So we'll need to be focused a lot on that over the next few years. With regards to financial update, Auckland Transport's net operating surplus from operations, which is excluding depreciation, is favourable for the first quarter at $4 million. And a quick update at the end of November, as of yesterday, that position has improved slightly to 5.5 million favourable position before depreciation. In terms of our capital programme delivery, again, at the end of the first quarter, as is in the report, we delivered $203 million worth of capital improvements against a budget of $273 million. At the end of November, and that was 65% of our budget. At the end of November, we've improved performance, and it's currently an expenditure of the first 4 months of the year of $273 million on capital, and that's 74% of our budget. Looking ahead, and we'll touch on some of these obviously in terms of challenges in our operating environment, it includes inflationary pressures, supply chain constraints, and resource and skills shortages. It's not all bad news. We have a few highlights from the last quarter. Again, I'll just flag that we have seen a growth in public transport use. It's not where we want it to be, but it is growing, and we will touch on that in a little bit more detail as part of our PT update. We have seen some encouraging results from our 2020 speed limit changes. So they've been in place now for 2 years. And on the roads that we've reduced the speeds, fatalities have decreased by 30%. And that's even higher on rural roads where fatalities have reduced by 48%. During the quarter, we also signed a long-term partnership contract with Fuller's 360 for improved services on a number of our ferry contracts, including removing the exempt deregulated arrangement on the Devonport ferry service, which is now a fully contracted service. And we also entered into 3 construction contracts for our first new hybrid or electric ferries, which will be in service in the next 18 to 24 months. We also completed, following a snagging period, the first section of the Eastern Busway, which was fully commissioned during the quarter, and we signed the alliance agreement for the construction of the next phase of the Eastern Busway as well. So that's a very quick overview of our first quarter performance. The rest of the time we will focus on public transport. Through each year, I'm assuming we would take all questions across the whole presentation at the end. Okay, thank you. Okay, so where are we at with regards to public transport patronage? Firstly, the graph on the left shows our historic performance over the last 10 years or so. PT patronage has been increasing over 10 years by around 7% per annum. In 2012, following on a lot of work over the previous decade or so with infrastructure upgrades, we increased from 70 million boardings per annum in 2012 to 103 million boardings in 2019, just before COVID hit. That was on the back of, and it was recognised globally that that was one of the highest rates of public transport growth in the world at the time, albeit from a very low base. And that was on the back of improvements to services, investment in services, and obviously investment in infrastructure as well. The graph on the right shows the fluctuations over the last 2 years as a result of COVID. So, for example, the real low points in that chart are the second and the fourth lockdowns in Auckland, where public transport dropped to less than 5%. I think we're operating around 1 or 2% of pre-COVID levels, which annualised is around 1 or 2 million boardings per annum. Currently, patronage, as I've said, has increased, and we're currently at around 70 million boardings per annum. We need to acknowledge, looking forward though, that as a result of COVID, there has been a change of travel behaviour across Auckland and across the world. There is now a recognised increase in working from home and increased localised trips. And at the moment, we're building into our forecasts a permanent reduction, taking the pre-COVID customer base of around 15 to 20% reduction in demand on public transport network. And therefore, to obviously increase patronage moving forward, we need to attract new users to the system. That provides our patronage profiles forecasts for this financial year. So the starting point for this financial year, last year we carried 42 million boardings. That was obviously around 42% of pre-COVID levels as a result of a lockdown towards the end of last year. The green line is our current SOI target profile of 59 million boardings for the year. The red is our current tracking. So we're currently tracking at a forecast of 65 million. So we're above SOI performance at this point in time. Within AT, we have an internal stretch target, which is the blue line, which would equate to an annualised 85 million passenger boardings. And the purpose of that internal stretch target goes without saying. At the end of this financial year, we want to be where that blue line is, as opposed to the SOI or the actual, because that will give us the best chance of hitting next year's targets as they currently stand as we exit this financial year. So that was looking back and giving the trends around public transport for the last 10 to 1 year. Some of the councillors would have seen this slide probably from last year sometime. I'd like to put into context as we jump into some of our key challenges over the next few minutes, put into context what we're trying to achieve with public transport and why it's important that obviously we take not just a short-term view but also an intermediate and longer-term view as well. So if we look on the left-hand side, we've obviously got a number of challenges, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So we've got the frontline shortfall of staff. We've got, as a result of that, we've got a number of temporary suspended services and cancellations. On top of that, we've got the rail network rebuild, which we've already talked about quite extensively, the committee has this morning. Both of those, along with inflationary pressures, are increasing the funding gap that we're facing for public transport. In addition to that, as I've just touched on, we have seen a change in travel behaviour and travel demand as a result of COVID, both an underlying reduction but also a change in where people actually want to go. What we believe we need to avoid is a downward customer spiral. So if we reduce services, that will lower customer amenity, it will lower customer service, it will lower patronage, and it will lower fares even more. And we will result in a greater funding gap and will be faced with probably even more service cuts. So certainly our focus at the moment has been how can we avoid any further public transport service cuts, noting that we've already temporarily suspended some bus services. On the right-hand side of the balance, obviously, is where do we want to go in the longer term with public transport and what are our aspirations. We actually need to be improving public transport. We need to be improving patronage, and that will provide transport options around the region, which we know there is inequity issues. It will actually have a positive impact on congestion, and we will be able to reduce transport emissions. So there's this fine balance between short-term fiscal, in particular, constraints and the longer-term growth that we want to see. I'll now hand over just to Derek, who will, and Christian, who will go through 4 of the key challenges that we're facing, where we're at, and what we're doing about it.
Thank you, Mark. So as you can see, one of the biggest challenges is the shortfall across our workforce, affecting mainly bus services and ferry crew. Across the entire network, we are about 560 crew short. On top of it, we have additional absentees and still some of the COVID cases impacted availability to run services on the day. We have spent a reasonable amount of effort and time to increase pays for bus drivers to reduce the current shortfall of 518 by implementing pay increases in July and in September to achieve average pay of about $27 to $28 an hour. And we are working with Waka Kotahi to increase the wage rates even further based on the recently announced SURF funding to support that, and working with the industry as they prepare for the fair pay agreements. We've adjusted timetables to minimize split shifts to make the roles more attractive, and we continue to challenge immigration settings right across the sector, both across bus drivers and maritime crew. We held Public Transport Career Day here at Komititanga Square, which was very successful. Number of operators were present. We attracted interest from about 200 potential candidates, and operators themselves are aggressively recruiting in New Zealand and overseas. We have lowered the impact of cancellations by removing some trips that were unable to be operated from 6th of November, and we continue to work across Auckland as well as nationally to improve the bus driver terms and conditions. So the situation creates quite a bit of impact on punctuality, and you can see here on the slide the relationship between the size of the operator in terms of the services they operate, the reliability that is affected by the shortage of bus drivers. There are a couple of standouts which allows us to, for example, plan more confidently for some of the additional rail replacement services, with both Go Bus and Hawaiian Eastern performing reasonably well, and their recruitment and additional resources available within the business allows them to cover the remaining gaps through overtime and other support staff. On the right-hand side, it's a good kind of snapshot of where the shortages are across different operators. And as you can see, some of them suffer up to 41% of driver shortage. With some are able to supplement the requirements from other parts of their business. Others are more dependent on the urban drivers they employ. So this in terms of performance, punctuality across trains has been impacted by key rail temporary speed restrictions, and in October we had the Western Line subsidence issue that impacted reliability on the Western Line. Across ferries, punctuality for those services that are running is in around 92% for October. And reliability has been affected by ferry crew shortage. So if we take into account, excluding any alternative transport, the reliability of ferry services was about 89%. In most cases, operators do provide alternative transport options. However, this doesn't provide the same level of service or customer experience. And while the trip may be counted, it actually doesn't provide the same level of service. So in terms of cancellations, we have, you can see here that across bus services, since we've made some changes to the timetables, the level of cancellations is started to drop off a little bit as some services were able to be reinstated. Across the train, reliability was, the cancellations were quite high, mainly due to the speed restrictions and the Western Line subsidence issue in October. And in November, majority of the issues were due to the speed restrictions, mainly on Southern Line. Ferries continue to suffer from high level of cancellations. And at the moment, we are pushing for some additional support from the central government to allow more maritime crew to provide additional exemptions or exceptions under the current settings to allow more overseas workers to bridge the gap currently, but also operators are working to mitigate some of the impacts on some days when cruise ships arrive in the harbour. In terms of funding gap, Mark has briefly mentioned about our performance against SOIs. So this is kind of a run rate and just a graph that demonstrates that for the FY24, we're targeting sort of 78 million passenger boardings. For a budgeting perspective, budgeting purposes, that is still being reviewed. And this graph probably best represents the changes in the revenue and the funding available between 2018-19, before COVID, when a third of the fare box plus other revenue sources, a third of Waka Kotahi subsidy and the rest, and the other third from council made up majority of our funding or revenue sources. During the 2021-2022, the revenue breakdown shows that the overall revenue have increased from almost 900 million to 955. But the patronage reduction and the fee reduction obviously increases pressure on the council and Waka Kotahi funding. So if you look at the green and blue parts of the chart in the middle, you can see how that funding requirements have increased. And with the budget preparation for 2022-2023, the cost spike as a result of double-digit contract inflation due to the inflationary pressures, but also increase in contract costs due to the additional wage for bus drivers, looks to require about $1.16 billion. I'll hand over to Christian to just recap some of the R&R response.
Thank you, Derek. So I will not come back to the reasons why Key Rail are undertaking those works. I will focus on the planning in the next years and our response. So Rail have planned the closure of sections of the network over the next 3 years. The first stage, as Dave Gordon mentioned, will be from January to March. That's the section from Newmarket to Otago, including the Onehunga line. Stage 2 is the Eastern line, the section from the Strand to Otago. The third stage will be Britomart in December 2023 and January 2024, coinciding with the end-of-year shutdown. The fourth stage from March to December 2024, that's the Southern Line section from Otago to Papakola. And the last will be from Newmarket to Henderson. Later stage will be early 2025, that's Manukau branch, Henderson to Swansea, and Newmarket to the Strand. So as Dave Gordon has mentioned, they will use the first stage to assess the productivity gain that they can achieve by having a big section of the network open for works. And that will inform the planning for the next stage. So we are hoping that we can be, I would say, closing shorter period of times the next section of the network. It's the first time that Rail actually have that amount of kilometers available for work in one go. So what is our response? We have already planned for stage 1 the bus replacement services. From starting at stage 2, we will also introduce express services from the closest stations down to Britomart, knowing that we need to also have full stops because people are not only moving from one station to Britomart but also stop on the way. We have provisions additional ambassadors to support guide and customers in stations. There is also the provision for temporary bus priority and cycleway infrastructure to support active modes. We are starting an in-depth media campaign, and not only in Auckland but also nationwide, to recognize people visiting Auckland. The good news is that for the FIFA World Cup, we have managed to force Rail to reopen the network, and so the services will run as usual. There is something I wanted to also highlight, is that we have learned more about bus repairment services with the closure of the Pukekohe to Papakola section. That's closed for the electrification, and we have worked closely with our customers and also with the local board to design the bus replacement services, and we managed to transport 80% of the passengers who previously were on the train. So we also are implementing these lessons learned from that first big closure. And I will hand over to Pete, who's designing our transport services.
Kia ora koutou. My name's Pete Moff. I'm Service Network Development Manager for Public Transport at AT. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of some of the trends that Mark touched on earlier and our response to some of those. So as Mark's already alluded to, we've seen substantial reductions since the March 2020 lockdown. Up until that point, we were seeing 5 to 7% growth per annum. We peaked at 103 million passenger trips per year. We saw, if you look at that in the second graph, we saw an initial fall to around 5% of trips, and then we've recovered quite strongly through to the August 21 lockdown. And at that point, we were actually tracking around in the top 5 of cities globally. We were at 70-75% of pre-COVID levels. So that was a great achievement. Since the second lockdown in August, the recovery has been slightly slower, but we are still seeing a very consistent fit in terms of where Auckland is compared to other cities internationally. I guess one point to make that isn't necessarily on this slide is that the recovery has been quite different depending on the mode. So bus recovery, for example, has been around 65%. Ferry recovery has been 82%, quite substantially higher, and train recovery in the high 50%. So it is quite different depending on the mode, and there's various reasons for that that I won't go into. So if we go on to the next slide. Thank you. So there's trends that have emerged, I guess, over time. There's also trends that have emerged in terms of how people travel across the day. And if we just go back to that working from home point again, before COVID, roughly 1 in 20 people were working from home on a regular basis. During the lockdown, that extended quite substantially to nearly half, around 9 in 20 people working at home. And then post-COVID, we've seen a permanent change. There are now 3 times more people working from home than there were before COVID. So 3 in 20 roughly compared to 1 in 20 before. So that has fundamental consequences. It means that people are travelling differently. It means that people are perhaps making more local travel. So rather than being so city centre centric, we're seeing slightly more localised travel around the region. We're certainly seeing a lot less peak demand, and we've devised a way forward that can help to address some of those opportunities. And if you look at the graph at the bottom left, that shows the travel patterns across the day before COVID in blue and after COVID in orange. So along the bottom there, you've got time of day. Along the y-axis, we've got the number of people travelling. There's a lot less people travelling at peak times, the orange line compared to the blue line, whereas at off-peak and evenings, it's quite similar to pre-COVID. So it presents an opportunity. And we've put something together that we're calling Network Recast, and it really looks at addressing how we might meet that new demand, that orange line, as opposed to the blue line. And the key headline is that we need to take some peak capacity away. So we're looking to take capacity away from very frequent services that might be running every 2 to 3 minutes to perhaps run them every 5 minutes. That type of change also has the double benefit of reducing pressure on drivers that Derek's already spoken about, and it allows us to reinvest some of our resources into the off-peak and the evenings and the weekends, the sorts of service improvements we need to make if we're to finalise our all-day connected network. So in terms of the benefits of that, it better meets the travel demand that we're seeing and the behaviour that we're seeing post-COVID. It accelerates our ability to produce a more equitable 24/7 network, giving additional services at off-peak. And an example of that is that we're moving a few trips from going from hourly to half-hourly across the day on some parts of the network as a result of these savings. It gives us some cost savings, and we also are able to remove some of the older bus fleet more quickly than we would otherwise be able to. It allows us to meet our emissions targets more consistently, and it is better aligned to the TERP, and we expect the first changes of Network Recast to be going live in around February of next year, so less than 3 months. And I will now hand over to Derek.
Thank you, Pete. I'll take you through some of the initiatives and things that are happening in the next 4 months. So Rail Network Rebuild campaign is very important to inform our customers what is happening and how we're going to respond. So the key objective of this campaign is really to ensure our customers are well informed about the Rail Network Rebuild program, with particular emphasis on a build happening in stages, because this is quite important to reassure customers that, for example, during the first stage of the closure, 85% of train services will still operate as normal. The campaign is also to maintain rail patronage and ensure customers are well supported through the disruptive periods, and the team will be using full range of media channels, as well as follow our initial kind of informed campaign that you see here as an example on the slide. Broader campaign on the future vision of the transport network will be rolled out as well to to explain to our customers what the future looks like after we go through the period of disruptions and rail network rebuild. So some of the other campaigns also focusing on how we're going to support the ongoing Auckland event season, which is kind of ramping up, with ongoing support for the continuing event goers, actively promoting public transport whenever possible, and advising ticket holders of their transport options so they know how they could get to the event. And a good example is the amount of work we put into a Billy Joel concert on the 3rd of December coming up while we have a block of line and the rail closure. We also have a campaign called Summer, Let's Go There, which provides a bit of a contextual marketing campaign with multimodal focus. It builds on some of our current campaigns in the market where we have seen more sort of broadening of the PTUs from the existing customers. And also learning into the more optimistic nature of the summer season and the great activities that people can enjoy in and around Auckland. So all you see here is just some of the draft collateral that will be part of the campaign. We also increasing number of mall activations following a successful trial. We have brand stands in 8 key mall locations across Auckland. Initially the 13-week program will launch in February. We also have a number of weekend activations that are encouraging Aucklanders to trial public transport with incentive payment for those who travel 10 times in the month after signing up to the challenge. We've created trained sales teams with a focus on journey planning and hop cards just to help our customers to use the tools we have and also encourage new customers or even occasional travelers. We also will be launching a new marketing campaign called Mix Your Go. It's a new creative platform which is being developed, also planned to be launched in February. And the creative concept designed to be in the market for 2 to 3 years. It will focus on highlighting Aucklanders' genuine travel choices across bus, train, ferry, cycling, scootering or walking. And we will be targeting Aucklanders who are well served by public transport and cycling networks where AT can deliver the promise of easy journeys. And we're also going to make further deployments of electric buses to reduce our carbon emissions, which will be supported by new Mission Electric marketing platform. So you can see on the left on some of the examples of what this looks like in terms of on-bus advertising, bus shelter, and some additional marketing at some key locations which will benefit from electric buses. So from December, we'll be rolling out additional 6 electric buses on Route 866 from Albany to Newmarket via Ponsonby, and 40 electric buses will come into service from late June 2023 for routes 22-24 from Newland. We also have this fully integrated marketing campaign will ensure that Aucklanders know their buses are going electric, and this is part of our wider plan for AT. This will include above-the-line media, proactive public relations, website landing page, updated and showing progress, and also internal comms to AT teams. This campaign supports our Whirinaki strategic pillar around trust, confidence and manner, and Michigan Electric is designed to increase the positive perception of Auckland transport and build excitement and anticipation of the future. And the images on the left relate to the Eastern Bay's launch, but each new bus arrival will be tailored to the location where they will be serving. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron, for the presentation there. Pretty informative, and I think there'll be a few questions from councillors going to the content, and in that respect, first person, Councillor Williamson.
Thanks for that, and we're, I guess, restricting ourselves mainly to just the public transport part of your operation. So I'd like to know if it's possible councillors could be given access to some reasonably granular data regarding your bus services. There is a public sort of almost hilarity raised with me about the number of double deckers passing them in a day that don't have anybody at all in them. And I've actually stood on the Pakuranga Highway and seen up to 7 go by and counted, 4 people in the whole 7 buses. So could we get access and somehow to something like by route, by day of week, by time of day, and I don't want to use the old airline vernacular of ASKs and RPKs, available seat kilometres and revenue passenger kilometres, but something like that, or passenger numbers and seating numbers, because it would be way better if this debate was sort of founded on some good quality information rather than just I reckons. It'd be really helpful, and I don't care how granular we can get that, we could always bring it up to whatever level we need after.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor, we can provide that, and we'll work through the chair as to how we do that. Effectively, we've got obviously all the AT hop data, so we can go into any level of granularity that we want to look at.
That's better for me.
So absolutely. So we'll work through that, and what's the best way to actually get that information across to the committee and individual councillors. Yeah.
Hey, that's good. Councillor Williamson will be glad to hear that. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I've got some questions around buses, and I've also got some questions around the presentations we had earlier on the Inner West projects. I'll go with the bus ones first because we're talking about buses already. I was really disappointed to see such a high level of cancellation and low reliability level from NZ Bus in particular. 20% cancellations, and that's certainly what I'm hearing from constituents. We have a lot of local services in my ward that are covered by NZ Bus, and I've experienced that personally myself, particularly on the 25 routes. What work is AT doing with NZ Bus, indeed with the other companies, to get to the bottom of that and solve that? And in particular, are there bus companies who are not allowing or not asking their drivers to do overtime? And then I've got 2 more on buses.
Okay, Councillor Derek Cooper here. I will answer your question. So NZ Bus, their reliability is for October was about 79%. Our target is 98%. Their level of cancellation is obviously varies on different services. We have worked with them on some principles. We have higher frequency services like the 25 often have more cancellations because we still want to retain a reasonable level of frequency. So we're targeting we don't want to reduce or cancel services where the impact would result in very big breaks or long breaks between services. So we prefer if they look at high-frequency services first. But NZ Bus and Riches are probably currently in most difficult situations with staffing. Both have recruited some drivers overseas. NZ Bus received their first 17 drivers last week who arrived from overseas. They're undergoing training to help fill the current gap. And the challenge for both NZ Bus and Riches and others is not that they are preventing, as far as we know, overtime. They actually have a challenge where people work just too much at the moment, which in some cases creates, people working basically maximum allowed hours under the transport regulations, which is up to 70 hours a week before they have to have their 2 days off. So as far as I know, everyone is working really hard, and I'm not aware that people are prevented from doing more.
Okay, I have heard from an NZ Bus driver that they are being at least discouraged from doing overtime, so that might be something to follow up with NZ Bus. You mentioned the Billy Joel concert, and I have a question in through our liaison, but I'll ask it here, seeing as you're in front of us and you've mentioned it. There's been a suggestion from Member Turner on the Puketapapa local board that you look to activate some of the bus lanes during that time, seeing as there won't be any, the rail will be reduced. Is that actually possible? is it possible to activate bus lanes outside of the times that, say 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And on the weekends? Is that actually legally possible? And is it something that we could, if not get in line for this weekend, it might be something that's worth looking at for future ones? Thanks.
Directly, I'll take this question, Councillor. So we are working on extending the operation of bus priority lines for the stage 1 of R&R closure. We haven't got such plans or things in place for the Billy Joel concert. There are some road closures and temporary traffic management around Eden Park to allow safe operation of buses. We have sourced over 110 buses in addition to the current normal scheduled buses to take customers and event goers to the stadium. We also, so that it required additional temporary traffic management arrangements around Eden Park. We have made arrangements to provide additional parking at several locations, and the information is available on our website, but also those customers or those event goers that purchase tickets received a full pack of how to get to Eden Park with the through Ticketek.
Yeah.
And we also provide shuttles from those various locations where additional parking has been provided to encourage park and ride, where shuttle buses will take event goers closer to the Eden Park. The biggest one probably is Alexandra Park. We will have a large number of car parks available, and shuttle buses will be taking customers to Eden Park. We've provided additional frequency on Route 64 because it takes people from the Newmarket area where they can transfer from other scheduled buses to Eden Park. And we also have additional supplementary services on Northern Busway to assist people from North Shore to get to the event.
So can I ask how the bus drivers were found for this?
The majority of the services are from some of the existing bus companies where drivers have a rostered day off. It's the weekend, so they don't actually, so they work overtime. And majority are sourced from other bus companies who are typically not contracted to provide public transport services. So there'll be other variety of different brands and buses available for the event.
Sure. I've got questions now about the Inner West project. Who would be the right person to direct that to?
I can either answer that now or take it offline, Chair.
I think we'll take it offline if you don't mind, Councillor Ferry. So,
I'm just aware we did have a public presentation on it, so seems a shame to not be able to continue the conversation in public.
Well, okay, we'll maybe come back to that. We've got quite a list of questioners here, and we were hoping to break at 1:30, which is just over 15 minutes away. So, if we have time, we'll come back to that one. Otherwise, we've got Councillor Henderson, Darby, Foley, Dalton, Simpson, Leone, and Councillor Newman. So perhaps, members, we could try and sharpen up our questions, notwithstanding the fact that there are councillors here who haven't asked any questions yet. So
we'll get us started, Chair, because Councillor Ferry's asked one of my questions.
Okay,
so that's fine.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Well, look, the public transport labour shortage is the big crisis in front of us right now. There's nothing that compares, to be honest. And so, look, can we just have a look at that a bit more closely, please? I raised this, Mark, you'll be familiar, I raised this at an AT board meeting way back in May, and I asked the question, did the Auckland Transport Board identify this challenge as a significant risk to its business? And it wasn't on the board papers as that. I think the reply from you at the time was, yes, you recognised it, but it didn't seem to be given the big highlight as a big business risk. So to my question to you at this stage, does Auckland Transport identify the labour shortfall as a big business risk right now?
The short answer is yes. And we did identify it as a risk, and not as a corporate risk, which is ultimately what gets summarised at the AT board meetings, but it was identified as an operational risk, particularly as part of our operational service delivery key risk. And that's why we're engaging with the Minister of Transport and of Immigration to look at, as you're aware, we've written many times to try and provide a bit of relief there. And for the last 18 months, we've been working with local bus operators to improve terms and conditions, with a view to pressure would come on when we came out of COVID lockdowns. And we've certainly seen an improvement there. Building into the budget this year, which obviously was approved and developed prior to last Christmas, was pay increases for bus drivers. So yes, it's been an active focus for the last few years. Now, obviously, we're still not where we need to be.
So just following on that, Chair, and look, I know you're doing the work, Mark, and the whole of the AT team, but it's still staring at us, and those numbers are not going away. That sort of the 500 plus number, and then on the ferry crew side, it ranges between 45, it might get as low as 39, then it's back up to 41. So there's a problem with retaining, and then there's also a problem with attracting. And one of the points that I made at that time was, does Auckland Transport go right into those operators' businesses and say, show us your staff retention program, show us your attraction program, what are the other incentives beyond wages? Can you just describe that, what that looks like, and well, whether you do that, and have you been doing that to that level? And also, I just want some clarification on the wages. On the slide, it says 27 to 28 as of July. There was Mayor Goff's press release as of September this year, which talked about an average of 26.62. There's talk about drivers all getting 28 at the moment, and the drivers are saying, no, that's not what I get, but thanks for inquiring, because I do ask them. And the driver I talked to this morning, just by chance, ahead of this meeting, he said there is nothing from his company about a wage increase. I'm on $26.50 an hour, and he's driving in the Auckland central area. Are we confident that the companies themselves are actually passing on the cash benefits to our drivers to the degree that we're talking about publicly? They're my questions. Thanks, Chair.
I'll let Derek take some of the detail around your questions, Councillor. I'll go back to 18 to 24 months ago. It was AT who actually instigated an interest-based problem-solving mechanism across all bus operators in Auckland to look at both terms and conditions, and that's where the wage issue didn't come to light, but was focused on. That resulted in funding, so we've been coordinating the bus industry in Auckland. That was reasonably successful, and now the Ministry of Transport and Waka Kotahi have taken that work and developed it into a national solution, which we're actually around the table at. So from an overall point of view, absolutely. Each individual operator, Derek's team is managing those contracts, and we have obviously contract managers allocated to each organisation. We ensure we audit to make sure that the funding increases are being passed on to drivers. With regards to the specific $27 versus 26 versus 28, they are average across all drivers across all Auckland, so there will be differences between individual operators. Some pay more, Waiheke Bus I think is the highest, and some pay less. So that might be some of the lack of alignment you're hearing from certain individuals. But in terms of actually managing and working with individual operators from literally a recruitment policy, a retention policy, an overseas recruitment policy, yes, we do. And Derek, you might want to give a few examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So the wages are different by each employer, and not every driver is straight away on the top rate, because they have when they start, they go through various stages of training and experience. And those that are typically on collective agreements, they have additional penal rates, additional allowances that top up their wages. So their base rate may be slightly lower than someone who may be on individual employment agreement with a flat rate. This is a changing landscape, because the operators, in order to meet the requirements to be able to recruit overseas, they have to meet the medium wage, New Zealand medium wage, to pay for those drivers. So, for example, NZ Bus, Go Bus was the first one that short time after we made the latest pay increase, they increased wages to $28 an hour in order to comfortably meet the medium wage and then invest in overseas recruitment. They signed up 50 drivers from Fiji to supplement their current requirements, and they very actively recruit locally in social media and engagements, sessions in malls and food markets. We know this because we created a special team that looks after restoring reliability, and they work together. The PT job fair that some of you have read or may have seen, it was part of a collaboration where our team was working with the operators, preparing for this campaign and working how they can either tap this into their internal, their own marketing and recruitment, or how they could contribute to our PT day. So across the bus drivers, as Mark mentioned, we've been working quite closely, and the objective for the minister and for the steering group for driver conditions is to achieve what will be referred to as a fair pay agreement, which will provide more of a consistent same wages. But this will take some time, and it's a lot of steps to go through. At the moment, we still have different level of pays for different drivers, and we're trying to bridge that gap. We also ensure that the indexation components of the labour adjustments is also passed on to the drivers by us making those adjustments through contract payments. So we have a full visibility of that. There is a bit of a lag between announcement and implementation because it takes a little bit of time. With ferries, Councillor, we have a greater visibility now since the change to the contract. We haven't been aware of the shortage to the level that we now have visibility through more detailed contract management with Fullers.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Darby. Good questions. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Many of my questions have been asked, so I'm just going to ask about the media campaign. And I'm mindful when I'm looking at slide 13, the proposed closures affect my area, Manukau, quite a bit because of the Otahu and the Manukau stations. And it looks like it'll actually affect that area for almost the entire time. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your media campaign to get those comms out to our communities that are very diverse, that are multi-ethnic, high numbers of Pasifika and Indian Asian communities, what's being done to get those messages out to those communities? Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, all our campaigns, obviously depending on the part of the region, are multilingual, so they get translated into, obviously, the local languages. And we work very closely with the local boards as well to push those out. But I'm happy to provide more information offline around the campaigns. Yeah,
thank you. And using the radio stations in those languages, our Pacific and ethnic communities rely a lot on radio stations for information, and we saw that during COVID and how valuable that was. And I'm happy to provide connections to the ones in our local board areas. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Foley, and I'm sure AT will take you up on that offer. So we've just got now Councillors Dalton, Leone, Newman, Mayor Brown, and Councillor Hills. No pressure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. I've got three questions, and they're relating to the quarter one. The first question regarding the quarter one is the increase in the DSI. I just wanted to know if you had the analysis of if that was due to speed or driver distraction or quality of the road, and did they happen, were they outside the car accidents in terms of hitting a pedestrian or a cyclist or a pole?
We certainly have the data around whether it was a vulnerable road user, inside, outside car, etc. And I can share that, obviously. Certainly in November, I mentioned November was the worst month for DSI over the last couple of years. And I think there was 9 deaths or fatalities on the road network. And off the top of my head, please don't quote me, I think there was 7 which were outside of car. So obviously vulnerable road users outside of car are,
because you've spoken in your report, or in your verbal report, about the impact, the positive impact of speed calming, or lowering the speed limits, and I just wanted to get the correlation with that and the fatalities that we've had, and what those, fatalities and or serious injuries as well.
Yeah, where we've got the data, and we don't always have the data, particularly for some traffic incidents, because the police will go through a statutory process to do investigation, etc. And we are part of that process, but there's timelines around release of that information for obvious reasons. But ultimately we do feed all of that information and data into our analysis as where we need to do safety interventions, including potential speed restrictions. And as you said, and as I said earlier, we have seen a very positive improvement where we have had some speed reductions.
Thank you. In your report, you talked about the funding of the TURP requires more money. We've had a Merrill release today saying that we'll be looking for 25 million from Auckland Transport, and the Expenditure and Control Committee will be looking for an additional 7.5. Do you need to wait until you get the statement of expectation from us before you can prioritise how you will continue to fund the TURP being implemented, and what gets cut, what gets reprioritised? Because it's there, it's supporting our climate action plan on the climate change emergency we declared, so we have a responsibility and accountability. It's something we have to do. Are you waiting for direction from us in that letter of expectation?
Definitely. Absolutely, we're waiting for the letter of expectation. That will feed obviously in, and it has already to an extent fed into our budget considerations for next year. That's we are part of that process, obviously. With regards to the TURP itself, that is a more fundamental question. I think everybody around the table knows that TURP isn't fully funded, if at all, and that will need to be part of longer term budget considerations, not just in the immediate term as well.
My third question is, in the presentation that we had earlier from the CRRL, there was a bit where they were talking about they're working with Auckland Transport just to, and I think it was, I'm going to get it wrong, but it was just the alignment of services. So my question was around, do you know how much of your operational budget is going to support that, the CRRL? And the transfer of responsibilities?
Absolutely, we know how much money we are spending on supporting CRL, but that is fully funded through a number of mechanisms outside of our core OPEX budget. So, for example, CRL and Council pays us directly for those support services, and it's under a separate agreement with us.
So would know how much of the money that's coming from Council to you is taken up. That would be really helpful information too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Leone?
Kia ora. Just got a very quick question. Whether you're going to look at lobbying to continue the subsidised fares to government?
We aren't actively looking to extend the 50% fares beyond January at this point. We are in constant conversation with Waka Kotahi around the Minister's intentions. But of course, Waka Kotahi have got their own funding constraints as well. So the conversation is happening. Are we actively asking them to extend? No, but we could do if that's the Council's wish.
Thank you, Councillor Leone, for that succinct question and the nature of that question. Continuing the succinct line, Councillor Newman.
A preamble from you, Chair. Hello, Mark. I've got a question regarding the quarterly reports as well, with respect to road maintenance. So you haven't you're not yet reporting on road maintenance because you don't report that until the end of the financial year. I presume that's simply a timing issue because your contractors might have a program of works, but they haven't reported to you their progress on that?
Sorry, progress in terms of the amount of output that we're...
Yeah, you're saying this is on page 23, these measures are reported at the end of the financial year, saying not yet reported this financial year. This is road maintenance against your SOI targets for rural is 88% and urban 78%.
Can I take that away? Because we actually do have, by month, the number of kilometres we're renewing and upgrading.
I thought that it was extraordinary that it's not there. Yeah. So, okay, well, if you could report that back to me. My next question, my final question also is on the TURP. So your quarterly report talks about
the National Emissions Reduction Plan, the ERP, which has different targets to the TERP, and it refers to there has been no indication of what will be provided from central government to enable the reduction. Our discussions are ongoing. Can you talk us through those discussions?
The Ministry of Transport has been engaging with all councils around targets for the emissions reduction programme, so that's the first point of engagement with Wellington on that, around what the forward targets may look like and how they might get written into the GPS for transport. In addition, we are having ongoing conversations with Waka Kotahi around additional funding streams, which the Ministry is linking back to ERP. So, for example, the Climate Emergency Response Fund, we have been successful in the last in the last week, where we've had 6 new projects been nominated, not confirmed yet, nominated for funding out of that scheme. So there's a number of conversations going on with central government.
Would you anticipate that the any funding that you would get would probably be linked to achieving the targets that have been set down in the ERP?
Correct, but by definition they would help with the TERP, obviously, as well.
They would, but if there's a variance in the targets between the ERP and the TERP, you would expect that the funding would be linked to achieving the ERP target, even that if there's a more conservative number than the TERP target.
Correct, and that's 100% central government funding.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Newman. And Mayor Brown.
Bingo. We're talking here about your quarterly report. I went through took the trouble of ploughing through all that small writing, and it's a horror story, really. It's just too much stuff there, and so I'm hoping that even before you get your letter of intent, that we can actually reduce it and make it less things that don't matter and more things that really do. In amongst there, there's a few little, you have to hunt for them, there's little gems amongst the flock. Mill Road. Can we talk about having a simpler way of that, instead of turning it a motorway, just fixing the 3 intersections? The parking strategy, God knows where that is, but as far as I'm concerned, we should be charging more. I don't understand why it costs me 4 times as much to park at Peter Cooper's than it does to park at the councils. Dynamic lanes is one of the things you're going to have to, which will show up, so start thinking about that. And the main strategic focus in the future will be to produce a comprehensive joined-up Auckland Transport Master Plan, which will involve you working closely with the Ministry of Transport and all the other crowded house that have their say. So start thinking about that. I've got the Minister's attention. He thinks it's quite a good idea. It's only about 30 years late, but it's given the changes from COVID, I think it's a very good time to do it. Some work was done in 2012 as a starting point, but things have changed a lot since then. That's kind of the bit I had to say. Just smarter, better, cheaper, faster. Thanks very much.
I don't know, have you wished to respond? I think the Mayor's made his points pretty clear.
Nodding was very good.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the biggest thing we can jointly focus on is a single plan for transport for Auckland. It's long overdue, and we need it. We've got many strategies, many plans, and we need a single one, which preferably everybody is aligned to, but they may not, and that's where we need to progress.
Right, thank you very much. And just standing between everyone and lunch now are the questions of Councillor Hills and Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. We'll try and keep them succinct. Mark, I have emails from 2 weeks before the horrible August lockdown saying, what is the plan for ferry cancellations and bus driver issues? So over a year ago, and to you and Shane and others, and there was a lot of we're working on it, but it's improving. And yes, then we had a big lockdown, so of course you weren't planning for that. But I guess all of us are exhausted dealing with these issues, and I'm sure you are all too. But can you give us 100% confidence that you see it improving sometime soon? Because the figures we have today are worse than they were a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just concerned that we're constantly putting out messages that we're on top of it, but it feels impossible.
Thank you, Councillor. We have been working on it for a number of years, as I've already responded to. But if there isn't the labour pool there, we cannot employ more drivers without, in the short term at least, going overseas, and in parallel increasing terms and conditions and wages, which requires funding. So we've done that twice using Council Waka Kotahi funding over the last 3 to 4 months. And I'm not sure whether we've paid the SURF contributions yet, but there's another pay increase coming in the next few weeks through the SURF central government funding. So I share your frustration, but if we cannot go overseas, if we can't recruit and there's not a labour pool, the only way you change that is to increase wages, which will have a cascading effect across the rest of the transport economy. And we've seen that, and we've had complaints from some of the trucking firms, for example, that we're artificially increasing wages as a result of the last 3 rounds. So it's not an easy fix. Sorry.
Thank you. Yesterday, they're talking about safety in Vision Zero. Yesterday, the decision on Levi James, his death, a cyclist, the judge said that he noted the stretch of road seemed to be particularly dangerous, and the strongest theme from a previous public consultation was requests to improve cycle safety. And of course, we didn't do that, and now what feels like from the presentations this morning, we are delaying more projects that include cycle safety. How can we as governors, and I guess the AT board as governors, allow this to happen if we keep getting warned that there could be deaths and serious injuries, and then we ignore the feedback, and then there are deaths and serious injuries?
The assurance I'll give is that safety and death and serious injuries is the AT board's top priority. Of course, interventions come with funding and with reallocation of road space, for example, and the projects you've mentioned, and I will provide an offline update for councillors who are interested where we're at on reassessing those, making sure they're good value for money, and that we are actually considering all users and going back through the new local boards to get decisions on those projects.
Okay, and last question on the TERP. Yes, I understand it's not fully funded, but I guess projects like the 3 mentioned this morning that have had a long road of consultation and funding, and also Great North Road, New North Road and others, they all contribute significantly to reducing emissions. So those are already funded, but we're potentially delaying them, costing them more, or removing the potential improvements around public transport, walking and cycling, which also reduces congestion. It is the only way to reduce congestion, so it makes it better for car drivers too. Can you, I guess, take the feedback or agree or give me a comment that the continual the TERP is unfunded is an opinion when some of the projects that would help the TERP are actually now sitting sort of half-started or paused?
Well, there's a number of points in there. The full TERP is not funded. That would require a 5 to 6 times increase in public transport, obviously, over 10 years. So we do need to work through that. And what is an implementation plan for that? And how do we weave those ambitions into all of our plans moving forward? With regards to the few let's not call them cycling projects, because they're not just cycling projects that we've mentioned. As I've said, we are taking a stock take of those projects. We are debundling those projects into safety expenditure, cycling specific expenditure, road renewals, maintenance, etc., making sure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck for each one of those in turn. And if that requires a potential rescope, that might be a recommendation that goes through our board, but then that will go through the relevant councillors and the local boards as well. And we're trying to do that as quickly as we can so that a final decision can be taken.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Our final question, Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. A very brief one. It's just at the start of the presentation, Mark, you introduced about the electric ferries, coming online. I just had a specific question. I don't know if you can answer it right now or not, around the technology and perhaps I'm thinking about hydrogen in the future. Can those ferries be swapped out with those new technologies, or are they built specific for that type of transmission?
Thank you, Councillor. Says yes, the technology is interchangeable and can be swapped in the future when new technology becomes more viable and available.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sayers. Thank you, gentlemen. I don't think there's any need for any debate or any further comment. I'm really hoping. No? Okay, thank you, members. So Councillor Walker will move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Foley. All those in favour say aye. Against? No. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Just a couple of procedural items really before we break for lunch that we should just fly through. Thanks everyone. The next item is item 10, is